speaking with director Sarah Moshman over her film, Nevertheless. And I watched this a couple days ago. Great documentary, by the way. So I want to start out. There's so many stories that you can tell within the Me Too movement. I think so many women have their own individual stories. Why did you focus on these particular stories? What drew you to the 7 women for this documentary?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on the show, and it's an honor to be part of the film festival. So basically this came about in 2017, really, for me, when I was reflecting on my own experiences being sexually harassed in the television industry, and every single one of my friends, women friends, had a story similar, worse, being disrespected, violated, harassed, in some cases assaulted. And it just felt like, what is going on in our country? How did we get here? What are we going to do with the Me Too movement? Where are we going to go from here? And so initially, I didn't exactly know what film I was making. I started interviewing experts, from employment attorneys to human resource reps to brave men and women willing to share their story. And I started to realize very quickly I didn't want it to be just educational, informational, very top level. I wanted to incorporate as much empathy as possible. And the way to do that, in my opinion, is to have individual stories. And so I called them really portrait pieces.
Right.
And I wanted each of the 7, we ended up with 7, and there were only 7 that we delved into like that in production. I wanted them to each kind of give a different piece of the pie. I didn't want them all to be a very similar story. I wanted different ages, ethnicities, genders. We have a transgender woman of color. We have a male survivor as well. I wanted everyone to see a piece of themselves, hopefully, or a piece of someone they maybe know,
Right.
within one of the 7 stories. So they're all very different. And of course, the film could have gone in 1,000 ways, but they're all very different in terms of, one's about hostile work environment, one's about gender discrimination, one's about rape. So they're all extremely different, and yet there's a lot of commonalities too.
Well, the one that got me, and first of all, I am a veteran. I was in the Army, was the Navy veteran, and it's not something that's talked about a whole lot. First of all, I served before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and
Really?
yeah, you don't need that, and if you ask any military guy, nobody gives a shit. As long as as long as you can do your job, whatever.
Yeah.
But I understand the politics behind it, and I think we're used to hearing stories about women being sexually harassed by superior officers, but we don't think about the men, because there's been gay men in the military, well, pretty much ever since there's in the military. We just don't talk about it. So like I said, that one, thank you very much for actually having that one in your doc, because again, it doesn't get talked about very often.
Yeah, absolutely.
In relation to the entertainment industry, I know it's easy to have an indictment because of the entertainment industry, because of what we've seen with Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and stuff. But so here's my specific question. Do you feel like that when you're trying to put men and women together at a writer's team, because I thought that was kind of interesting about the Friends writing group, and you're dealing with guys, what we would consider locker talk. Do you feel like that's always been the thing and has it gotten better? Does that make sense?
Sure. So to give a little context for those that haven't seen the film, Amani Lyle is featured in the film, and she was a writer's assistant on Friends in the height of their popularity. So I think it was season 6. And she's a Black woman, and she was one of the only people of color in the room. And what she experienced was more of a hostile work environment. So the behavior wasn't directed to her, Amani, but it was everywhere in the room. The comments that were being made, not just about the characters. This is where it's important. It wasn't that they were plotting they were coming together with story ideas about the characters. They were also speaking about the actresses themselves.
Right.
And egregious, vulgar, crass language that is completely inappropriate for any work environment, but definitely in this environment. So that's really the distinction. And so she was terminated wrongfully. So she ended up suing Warner Brothers for wrongful termination and racial discrimination. Of course, she lost. But the writers on the show completely owned up to everything they said. They didn't deny anything that was said, which is also important. There was no denial. It was that they said they needed to speak this way in order to write the script for the show. Okay,
Right.
so their defense was called creative necessity.
Right.
And this case went on to be quite infamous because it was writers everywhere in Hollywood felt like there's no way that Amani can win because we'll never be able to say whatever we want in any writer's room till the end of time. Like they felt like it was a free speech case. And of course, there's some truth to that. Of course, writers need the freedom to be able to bounce ideas off of each other and brainstorm. And certainly there are sexual themes in many shows, but
Sure.
Friends, when you think about it, was not that racy.
Yeah,
and
it's kind of a PG show, you know.
yeah, so it's funny. I think about like the show Veep, which is kind of like an equal opportunity offender,
Right.
where the things they say in that show are terrible, but it's kind of about everybody. I'm not excusing that language, but I wonder what it must be like to be in like a Veep writer's room. I think there's just a way for management, for the writers, for the showrunners to set the tone and to make sure everyone feels comfortable and included and that everyone has a voice. So this was a situation where it was mostly white men in the room. There's one Black woman who was going to be the first Black woman on the show to have a writer's credit, which is really important, which she never got. And she, had the audacity to speak up and say, hey, this is not okay. They're speaking about the actresses in such an egregious way.
Well,
So,
you talk about it being free speech. Yes, that's an argument you can make, and there is.
for anything, yeah.
Right. But nobody really, but the question you have to ask is, but should you do it?
Exactly.
Because there is decorum. There is, it's like your grandmother saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Okay.
Right.
And, in my family, it was always the lesson, could you speak that way in front of your mother? No.
Right.
If you can't, then don't do it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
it feels like we've come a long way over the last, few years and everything with this movement. I mean, we've seen people held accountable and stuff. Do you, and I know you had your own experiences, but do you feel like Hollywood is kind of coming back around and realizing they've been wrong and changing, or do you feel like it's, nope, we've got some scapegoats and we're going to...
Yes and no. I think it's, first of all, when I was set out to make Nevertheless, I never wanted to focus on just one bad guy or one bad company, like a Bill Cosby, like a Harvey Weinstein. That's really not what the film is about. It's about a cultural shift.
Right.
And so I think although ousting these sort of monsters at the top, I guess, of course, is important, and seeing actual consequences for decades of injustice, of course, that's important. But does that solve the problem in a cultural shift kind of way? No. I think the awareness is obviously really important, and that all of us cannot deny that this is happening to men and women in every industry across the board, and some very necessary attention has been placed on this movement. But that's just the beginning of any social movement, is first the awareness and then the action. And I think this year, 2020, has been really difficult because it's really set us back in terms of women are leaving the workforce in droves because of the lack of childcare, because of virtual learning, because of COVID-19. So when I think about us going back to any kind of normal, hopefully in 2021, I hope that's not just in terms of our health and safety, but also our personal safety in terms of harassment, in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like, how can we redesign what it means to be in the workforce for women, for people of color, in every sense, not just, oh, I hope I don't get COVID-19.
Right.
So it's like, I think we have a really rare opportunity here to kind of rethink and redesign what it means to be equal in the workplace.
That's a great way of looking at it. I know that all the stories mean something to you as, the director. Was there one particular story that just really got to you in doing this documentary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they all really struck me in different ways. But Patricia Brooks is featured in the film. She was a 911 dispatcher in San Mateo, California, about 20 years ago. She was the best at her job. This is the person you want in an emergency. You're calling 911, and she might be on the other end saying, "How can I help you?" And one night, her supervisor, when they were alone in the office together, comes over and gropes her. They had known each other a long time. They were great colleagues. She had won awards for her work. I say all that because then immediately it all fell apart, and nobody believed her. She was demoted. She had to file a lawsuit, and really her life fell apart from this one incident. And what struck me about her story, and that's just really the beginning of the story, the film really follows her 20 years later, sharing her story to help pass a law in California called SB 1300, which did pass January 1st, 2019. So it's a really incredible story featured in the film. But what struck me about her story was, I asked, if you could do it all again, would you? Like, sort of didn't even make it in the film. Like, if you could change anything, would you go back and do it all again? And she said, absolutely, because her daughter learned to stand up for herself. Her daughter learned to have a voice. And sure enough, 20 years later, her daughter had an instance where someone grabbed her in a park and it was very scary. And she had the strength to stand up and say, this happened to me. And they caught the guy. So it's, you know, these movements don't happen overnight. This change is not quick. The awareness felt fast in 2017 with #MeToo. But these problems will continue to be solved over time if we all put in the effort to be in allyship with one another.
All right, last question. Here's your nerd question. We're going to test your nerd. If you could have a weapon of choice or a superpower from within the nerd universe to fight the forces of evil, what would you choose?
Well, I don't know much about the nerd universe, I suppose, so I don't know what my choices are, but I would say my superpower would be to give everyone empathy so they could see people's situations and stories from a different perspective, because I think when you're empathetic, you can be more equal and be more caring and compassionate for others.
Nice. A little touch on the shoulder. You're being mean. Done.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a great superpower.
Yeah.
Well, again, great documentary. Thank you for making it. I think it's a conversation that, you know, like you said, will continue, and we need to continue to have it. So
Thank you.
good luck with the film.